These days, many of us are used to paying for the TV we watch, whether it's for platforms like Sky or Virgin Media, or to download films and box sets over the internet. But the BBC is different. It's still largely funded by the licence fee, which has been around in one form or another for 90 years. The broadcaster Nick Ross thinks it's time to think again about how we pay for shows like this one. We'll speak to him in a moment. But first, he's been to our HQ, Broadcasting House, which some of you might be familiar with from the BBC comedy W1A.
Stand by to mix through a Q-on-2.
Hi, I'm the new head of values for the BBC. Well, not really, but if you've seen W1A, the satirical series that lampoons the BBC, nothing would surprise you about who was head of what. If you haven't seen it, believe me, it cuts pretty close to the bone. But if you were head of values for the BBC, what sort of vision would you want this place to have? After all, it is a cultural triumph. It's one of the few British institutions that still carries great weight right across the world. But it's so limited in its vision, it's so afraid that culture and competition can't coexist.
Time now for the shipping forecast.
This is one of the corridors of power. In fact, the corridor of power. Lord Hall, the Director General, is just up there on the left. And he's surrounded by advisors, all of whom cling to the same security blanket, the licence fee. They're terrified that if we in Britain are given choice, we won't want the BBC. But I think they hugely underestimate the talent here. Risk aversion is driving the BBC into a dead end. The licence fee, when it comes up for renewal in 2 years' time, will be 90 years old. And as every year goes by, it becomes more and more anachronistic. In a multi-channel age, when people increasingly get content through computers, telephones, heaven knows what, the TV licence is increasingly archaic. It will become redundant just as the radio licence did in 1971. But more importantly, while the world's content industry is booming, films, videos, games, internet, radio and TV itself, the BBC can't grow at all. It's trapped. Replacing this poll tax with subscription would liberate the BBC. I believe it would get almost universal uptake. It would hugely increase the money, the resources going into the BBC. It would unleash its talents. In any case, the licence fee risks public and political fatigue. And if that happens, if the BBC income stagnates or is cut, that wouldn't be satire, it would be tragic. And it would be hard to forgive those who led us down that path.
And Nick Ross joins us now. Nick, the BBC has said a subscription service would turn the BBC into a commercial operator with an incentive to provide services that maximise revenues and profits. Is that what you want?
That's what it is.
And you want to extend it?
Well, I just want it to be honest. At the moment, and I've worked for the BBC for a very long time, I don't now have no vested interest one way or other in this. I don't have a BBC pension. I've always been freelance. We make all that clear. At the moment, the BBC desperately needs to prove that it gets a very big audience, just like an advertising or commercial channel does, because it needs to get the licence fee renewed. Those pressures on the BBC aren't really, we're not honest about it. And my view is that if we were honest about it, we could get much more revenue freely without sending people to prison, sending them to court because they don't pay the licence fee.
What level would you want to see the subscription set at?
At a level that people want to pay voluntarily. Now, I was with a senior person from the BBC a few days ago who told me that they've done surveys that showed most people wouldn't want to pay voluntarily, or at least, 20% of people wouldn't want to pay £12 a month, which is what it costs at the moment. Well, I did an experiment on that. I asked him, how did you get that result? He said, we just asked people. So I went out into the street and I asked people, how much would you pay to watch Sherlock, just one series, which is only 3 episodes? Most people I asked who liked Sherlock would pay £12 just for that. There's a huge untapped amount of cash coming into this industry. Netflix in 5-10 years has gone from virtually nothing to a $3 billion a year industry. BBC is missing out on this.
Right. I mean, you say you've done your own sort of evidence, if you like, but
Well,
the BBC's convinced it would lose money on the evidence and the sort of polls that they've done, focus groups, that people would not pay if they weren't forced to pay.
Because the BBC people who are commissioning this research all cling to the licence fee. They're cherry-picking evidence, they're looking for the evidence that sustains their own view. If Rupert Murdoch had listened to these people, he would never have got people paying an average of £550 per household for Sky. These people, I understand where they're coming from. They are frightened, they're timid, they don't want the BBC to be damaged, so they cling to what they know.
Right.
But I think it's driving it, as I say, into a dead end.
But you're looking at Sky. I mean, if you look at the BBC licence fee, it's set £145.50. You've divided it up by month. But if people were being asked to pay £30 a month, let's say, because it would be probably more expensive. If you look at the sort of amounts people pay for Sky, it would be unaffordable for a lot of people who can afford £145.50
I'd say two
a
things
year.
to that. Firstly, it would be voluntary, so it's up to people what they spend on it. Secondly, remember the rather cruel old joke when Sky first started, which was, what are those square things that are attached to the satellite dishes? And the answer was their council homes. Generally, it's poorer people who can't afford to go out, who can't afford to go to dinner, who can't afford to hold supper parties, go to the theatre stuff, who are prepared to invest much more in what they get at home. And I don't think you'll find that a problem. I think the uptake will be enormous. If the BBC does good programming, that's what it's about. It's
right,
about the programme,
good programme, but the whole point is there is a public service remit, isn't it? Doing programmes that some people might not think are good programmes in that sense, but others feel should be out there. The BBC claims they're the only ones who do that.
Oh, I don't think they do. Even in their most preposterous sense of self-importance, the BBC doesn't say that. It knows that Sky, that ITV, above all Channel 4 and Channel 5 do a lot of good public service programming. And it also knows the BBC does an awful lot of stuff that would flourish perfectly well on the commercial market. It's very hard to call it public service.
Or what do you think about a future funding model, David Willetts, for the BBC? Should the licence fee stay?
Well, this is an issue that's going to be debated as we head into future charter renewal
What do you think?
Well, I actually like the fact that it's universal. I like the arrangement which ensures that people are sharing in something, and that the fee. I think there's of course been a lot of debate in the Commons about the criminality of it, but the fee for the TV licence is a lot less than some of the costs of the commercial options. And Nick has to explain why he thinks that we could do it on those things. But I mean, it is an interesting idea.
Could I ask David a question? Would you be prepared to set the BBC licence fee so that it goes up about 10% per annum for the rest of the next 10-year charter renewal? Because if not, the BBC will be progressively eclipsed compared to whatever else goes on in British
But if you're
broadcasting.
wrong about the amount of money that's coming in, which services would you cut?
I wouldn't. I would cut the ones I couldn't sustain, or I'd get and some things, incidentally, the government would, as now, would subsidise, just as it subsidises over 75s now, and it does subsidise other things. I'm not trying to privatise the BBC. It would have pretty much the same broadcasting, public service principles it does now. It would just get more income.
Would you have advertising?
Absolutely not. Just on a commercial basis, because that would ruin its USP.
And that's
also
what a lot of people dislike about the other channel.
In any case, the way that advertising works in real-time television is getting very much out of date, because kids now just spool through them.
Nick Ross, thank you very much.
Thank you.